Chapter 10 Honest Loot from the Walter Scott. We sneaked aboard, feeling the way with our feet and spreading our hands out before us. Pretty soon, by Jiminy, away down through the hall, we saw a light. In the same second, we heard low voices. Jim whispered that he was feeling sick and for me to come out. Away. Just then I heard a voice wail out. "Oh, please don't. Boys, I swear I won't ever tell." Another voice spoke pretty loud. "You always want more than you share, and you always got it too. Because you promised, if you didn't, you'd tell. But this time you have said it one too many. You're the meanest hound in this country." In a minute, Jim was gone from the raft. But I said to myself, Tom Sawyer wouldn't back out now, and I won't either. So I dropped on my hands and knees and crept along until I saw a man stretched on the floor and two men standing over him. One of them had a tin lantern in his hand. The other one had a pistol pointed at the man's head on the floor. He was saying, "I'd like to, and I ought to, a mean skunk." The man on the floor would shrivel up and say, "Oh, please don't, Bill. I won't ever tell." "Dean, you won't. You never said a truer thing than that. Hear him beg, and yet if we hadn't gone the best of him and tied him up, he'd have killed us both." "Put up that pistol, Bill," said the man with the lantern. "I don't want him killed, and have my reasons for it." "Bless your heart, Jake Packard," said the man on the floor, sort of blubbering. "I'll never forget you long as I live." Packard didn't take any notice of that. He hung up his lantern on the nail and motioned Bill to follow him. They started toward where I was, there in the dark. I crawfished as fast as I could and crawled into the stateroom. I heard the men coming, pawing alone through the dark. "Here, come in here," said Packard. And in they stepped, but before they got in, I was in the upper berth, cornered, and sorry I had come. They stood there with their hands on the edge of the berth and talked low and earnest. Bill wanted to kill the man. "He has said he'll tell, and he will. He'll turn state's evidence. I say put him out for his troubles." "So do I," said Packard, very quiet. "Well then, let's go and do it." "Hold on a minute. You listen to me. I won't be more than 2 hours before this wreck's break up and washes off down the river. See? He will be drowned and nobody to blame for it but himself. That way is just as good and brings no risk of a halter for us." "All right then, come along." So they left, and I crawled out of there in a cold sweat. It was dark as pitch out on deck. I said in a coarse whisper, "Jim," he answered, right at my elbow with a sort of moan. "Quick, Jim, there's a gang of murderers in yonder. We must hunt up their boat and set her drifting down the river. Then the sheriff can get all of them. Quick, hurry, I'll hunt this side, you hunt that. Start at the raft and—" Oh my lordy, they ain't no raft. She done broke loose and gone. I caught my breath and almost fainted. Shut up on a wreck with such a gang of murderers. We had to find their boat now, had to have it for ourselves. So we went quaking and shaking along until we could get to the stern. No sign of a boat. Jim said he couldn't go any further. He was so scared he had no strength left. But I said, "Come on, if we get left on this wreck, we are in fix sure." So on we prowled again. When we got pretty close to the cross hall door, there was their skiff. In another second, I'd have been aboard her. But just then the door opened. One of the men stuck his head out only a couple of feet from me. He flung a bag of something onto the boat and then got in himself. It was Packard. Then Bill walked out and got in. Packard said in a low voice, "All ready? Shove off." "Hold on," Bill said. "Did you search him?" "No. Didn't you?" "No." "He has a share of the cash yet. Come along." No use to take truck and leave money. So they got out and went back inside. In half a second, I was in the boat and Jim tumbled in after me. I out with my knife and cut the rope, and away we went. We didn't touch an oar, we didn't speak nor whisper. We went gliding along, dead silent, past the wreck. In a minute or two more the boat was 100 yards below the wreck, and darkness soaked her up. Then Jim manned the oars, and we took out after our raft. Now I was worried about the men. I thought how dreadful it was, even for murderers, to be in such a fix. No telling, I might come to be a murderer myself yet, and then how would I like it? So I said to Jim, "The first light we see, we'll land 100 yards above or below, and find a good hiding place for you and the boat. I'll go find somebody to get the gang out of their scrape. Then they can be hung when their time comes." Pretty soon it began to storm again. The rain poured down. We boomed along down the river, watching for lights and for our raft. By and by, a lightning flash showed us a back thing floating ahead. We made for it. It was the raft, and we got aboard again, mighty glad. Then we saw a light on shore, away down to the right, so I said I'd go for it in the skiff. I told Jim to float along on the raft and keep a light burning till I get back. The skiff was half full of plunder that the gang had taken from the wreck. We hustled it on the raft in a pile. Then I took the skiff and shoved for the light. As I got down towards it, 3 or 4 more lights showed up on a hillside. It was a village. The shore light was the lantern on a ferry boat. I skimmed around and found the watchman asleep. I shook his shoulder 2 or 3 times and then began to cry. He stirred up in a kind of startled way and said, "Don't cry, bub. Oh, dang it now. Don't take on so. What's the trouble? Are you the watchman of this boat? Yes, and I'm the captain, and the owner, and the mate, and the pilot, and the head deckhand, and sometimes I'm the freight and passengers. I'm not as rich as old Jim Hornback, but I wouldn't trade places with him. I broke in. Miss Hooker is in an awful peck of trouble. If you take the ferry boat and get her off the wreck, you mean the Walter Scott? Yes. Why? Great goodness, she had better get off mighty quick. How in the nation did she ever get on that wreck? She was visiting up there at the town, you know. Yes, I know. Booth's Landing. Go on. She was visiting at Booth Landing, and just at night we started to cross the river. She was going to stay all night at a friend's house, Miss, what you may call her, I don't remember her name. Well, we lost the steering oar and went floating down till we hit on the wreck. I was the only one that could swim, so I made a dash for it. Miss Hooker said if I didn't help sooner to come here and hunt up her uncle. Now if you'll go in by Jackson, I'd like to. Who's going to pay for it? Why, that will be all right. Miss Hooker told me that her Uncle Hornback. Great guns, is he her uncle? Yeah, looky here. You break for that light over yonder and tell Jim Hornback I've gone to get his niece. Hump yourself now. I'm going around the corner to rouse up my engineer. As soon as he turned the corner, I pulled up shore and tucked myself in among some wood boats. I waited to see the ferry boat start, but before that happened, here comes the wreck, dim and dusky, sliding along. A cold shiver went through me. I struck out for her. She was floating very deep, not much chance of anybody being alive in her. I pulled out all around her and hollered, but nobody answered. All dead still. Then, here comes the ferry boat. So I shoved to the middle of the river till I was out of eye reach. Then I stopped and looked back to see the ferry boat go and smell around the wreck. But pretty soon, the captain saw no hope of anybody being alive on the wreck. He went for shore. I laid into my work and went a-booming down the river. I felt a little heavy-hearted about the gang, but not much. If they could stand it, I could. It seemed a long time before Jim's light showed up. When it did show, it took 1,000 miles off. By the time I got there, the sky was beginning to get a little gray in the east. We struck for an island, hid the raft, and turned in and slept like dead people.